Good day, everyone. Welcome to students of Energy Society in the Middle East. This video is to familiarize you with the books used for my course on Energy Society in the Middle East. There are a number of books, as well as videos and supplementary material. But what I wanted to do in this video is to very briefly go over all of them. That is to say, the books. They are excellent. A number of them are sort of wildly popular and or authoritative. And so they're useful beyond even the scope of just the course. First and foremost, it would help, of course, if you look at your syllabus and that you remain guided always by the four modules or weeks that we are, of course, going through as I speak. The first week, of course, our module looks at the oil curse in the rentier state, and our book for that is Michael Ross's The Oil Curse. This book is an excellent book. Michael Ross is a political scientist who loves calculus, as you'll notice. So the point of this book is really to look at how oil drives an economy, and especially how around the world that has caused certain problems in the development of nations and countries and governments and democracy, right? So you can, of course, learn about how oil can enrich a nation, but how can it also impoverish a government. So that's what this book is about. And one of the hidden gems of this story is the role of women, but I'll leave it at that. Next in line, of course, is the role of maybe some social, religious, cultural issues. This book is a very popular book called Guests of God by Robert Bianchi. It's an excellent book focusing especially on the Islamic pilgrimage, the Hajj, and looking at how religion is funded. And in this case, how the Islamic religion in the modern world is really funded by oil and gas. Less and less so as we move forward, but it's a very important story that looks at how religion is funded in the modern world and how Islam can have such a global reach through countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and other countries as well. The third sort of module and book is 50 Million Rising by Sadia Zahidi, looking really at issues of gender, youth, and 50 million refers here to the number of women that have been added to the job market in the so-called Muslim majority countries or Muslim world in the past sort of 10, 20 years. So there's sort of been this sprint in women and the development of women, and I would say youth to a lesser degree in the Muslim world, but it's a story again that has not been told, and this book is hot off the press. It's 2018, so it's very exciting. The last sort of module, number 4, is looking at sort of alternative energies, corporate social responsibility. This book is not that well known. It's by Gaudat Bahgat, who's a very, he's well known. He's a social scientist, a political scientist as well from Egypt. And the book is very good. It's sort of a good survey of what are Middle Eastern countries in North Africa, in sort of the central Middle East, Iran, the Gulf. What are these countries doing to plan for a future without oil and gas? So that's also exciting. I don't have the book, but I have here sort of a printout of Cities of Salt by Abdurrahman Munif. This is a best-selling novel. And the point of this book, it's a great story. You have, I think, 3 chapters assigned from this book. What happens? What are some of the stories again? Personal stories with names that pertain to countries that go from nothing, from rags to riches, that go from nothing to having all of a sudden all this oil wealth. And what are some of the problems that come along with it, like foreigners living in your country and the sort of breakdown of the tribe and things of that nature. So again, very popular book, very important and exciting read. In association with the fourth module here, CSR in the Middle East, it's a book by Jamali and Sidani. It's sort of a good, again, survey of what are certain corporations and family businesses and entities beyond the self or even beyond the tribe doing in order to, to do good, to give back to the poor, to give back to society, to develop education, infrastructure in these countries as a result of having wealth, sometimes accumulated through energy. This book, which you read, I think, as your first reading assignment, is Carbon Democracy by Timothy Mitchell. It is an excellent book. It is a very important book. You should read the whole thing after the course if you haven't already. It really is a sort of master narrative of how human beings have, over 100 years, exploited hydrocarbons, coal, and later on oil, and of course natural gas, which we'll talk about in a second. How they've exploited it to enrich themselves, to power the economy, to power the world, and also how it's compromised or limited our ability to govern ourselves through democracy, right? So carbon democracy, that's where things come together. It really talks about sort of the limits of democracy by looking at energy. This book here it's basically a history of the modern Middle East by Cleveland and Bunton. Okay, so William Cleveland, many years ago, wrote this sort of authoritative book on a history of the modern Middle East. It's an excellent, easy, very, very good sort of survey of the entire region in the past sort of 100 years or so. I would read it again or read from it the portions that you feel you want to enrich yourself about. If you want to know more about the Israel-Palestine conflict, if you want to know more about Saddam and the conflict with the United States, etc., etc. There are a couple of books over here. This is a huge book by Daniel Yergin. It's called The Prize. Being here in Houston, there's a sort of common mantra that if you're in the oil and gas industry, you have to read this book. You have to know Yergin's book on The Prize. So again, if you are going to continue working in energy and if you are sort of part of the Houston community, you should really familiarize yourself with this book, The Prize. There's, of course, a video which we're watching portions of that goes sort of along with this book. It's, again, sort of a master narrative of how human beings have exploited, especially oil. And you can see, of course, here the fire blazing because of all the wars that it's caused. So there's a little bit of a hint of what's in there. This is also by Daniel Yergin. I think I've assigned some chapters of this book for the course. This is his next sort of master narrative. It's also a pretty beefy book, but it's easier to read. It's called The Quest. And the focus of this book really is not so much on the exploration, but on energy security. So this is what Yergin thinks is the future. Daniel Yergin himself, of course, is an economist. He's a big-time sort of consultant. He's a yes man. He's an oil man. And this is his perspective on sort of the future and what it needs to look like. This book is by Alan Mikhail, Water on Sand. It really is a book written by historians and geographers and ecologists. So what is the physicality of the Middle East like? What about its rivers and its mountains, and what has sort of the exploitation of energy resources and other things done to the Middle East, as well as building dams like the High Dam in Egypt? This is, of course, a great book in that regard. And finally, there is this book here, Political Economy of the Middle East, by a number of authors, including John Waterbury, who is a famous historian of the Middle East. And of course, this is a pretty beefy book, again, on the economy of the Middle East. I would only approach this if you really had a technical interest in what's going on in the Middle East as far as governance, taxation, corporate entities, where they've done things wrong, where they've done things right. So that is a brief survey of our readings. Again, don't be overwhelmed. Remain guided always by our 4 modules, the 4 weeks, and our initial 4 books. They are excellent. They're, I think, relatively straightforward to read. Don't dwell on the details. Focus on the big point. So this video and the questions that I ask you should really allow you to focus on what's important and ignore what's not. Thank you.